Some people are born with the extraordinary capacity to step into their sphere right away. They're just prodigies. They have a genius to them that's so obvious that everyone knows that they're going to the field of science or education or business or the arts. And then there are the rest of us that spend our lives wondering what is our particular talent, what is our particular contribution to the world. I've been one of those people that has traveled from sphere to sphere to sphere, trying to figure out where I belong in the world. In fact, around 8 years ago, when I was just about to turn 50 years old, I sat down with my wife, Kim, and I said, honey, I think I'm gonna make a career shift in my life, and I'm gonna move from being a pastor to being an artist for the next 20 years. I just wanna create beautiful things. And she said, sure, go right ahead. I have such an encouraging wife. And so when she said that, I was excited, and I went into the world of fashion design and filmmaking, and I began to give my life to create beautiful things in this new sphere of life. And about a year later, my wife, Kim, who's sitting over here, said to me, we need to have a conversation. And I said, well, we talk all the time. No, she goes, no, a real conversation. We need to talk about what you're doing with your life. I said, well, what do you mean what I'm doing with my life? She goes, well, you're now like a fashion designer and you're a filmmaker, and what happened to ministry, I need to know what's going on. Aren't you gonna talk to me about this? And I said, honey, we did talk about this a year ago. I sat down with you and I said, I wanna live my life as an artist. I'm gonna create beautiful things. And you said, sure, go right ahead. And she said, that doesn't count because I didn't think you could be successful. And so now we have to re-talk this thing over again. But one of the things she really did believe in me about was as a writer. I used to be a writer, I used to write books, but I gave up on that. I walked away from that, and I was going to pursue a new sphere in life, but Kim kept coming back to me and saying, you need to write, you need to write, you need to write. This is your arena, this is your sphere of influence. So after 6 years, I decided to write again. And I have a particular approach toward writing, so I'm in the living room, and my wife Kim walked through, and she knew I was writing again, and I could see the happiness on her face. Let me tell you, I am so happy when my wife is happy with me. And she gave me that look, and she said, you're writing again, aren't you? And I said, yes, I am. And she looked at me and she said, I'm so excited, what are you writing about? And I always name every book just one word at the beginning. So I said, it's called Artisan. And she looked at me and she said, you take my breath away. I don't know how God would give me such a gift to be married to a genius like you. You inspire me. She didn't say any of that. She actually, I'm a writer. And that's how I wrote it in my mind, but she didn't say that. She looked at me and she said, great, a book for people like you, but what about the rest of us? And I became so angry in that moment. And I became so convinced that this is exactly what I needed to write about. You see, my wife is one of the most extraordinary, gifted people I've ever known. If you meet Kim and me at the same time, you'll know she's color and I'm cardboard. She is an explosion of creative genius, and I'm just sort of plodding my way along in life. And when she thought that this book about being an artisan was not about her, but about me, I knew that we needed to have this conversation. I looked at her and I said, this is the problem. You've believed the lie that there are some people out there who are artists, they're creative. They have the capacity to do beautiful and extraordinary things, and then there's the rest of us who are just supposed to sit back and applaud the creative geniuses in the world. But the reality is that every human being is both a work of art and an artist at work. And I want you to know today, the reason these spheres exist, the reason there's a sphere of business and education, the reason there's a sphere of the arts, the reason there's a sphere of religion and everything else is because human beings are imagined to imagine and created to create. And one of the most powerful things God ever put in us is the ability to imagine what does not exist and then translate that imagination into reality. You are not like every other species on this planet. If you were a beaver, you would be making dams for the rest of your life. But you're a human. And you can see a future that does not exist. You can have dreams and visions of a world that we've never actually known. In the way that bees create hives and ants create colonies, humans create futures. God breathes his imagination into us. He puts his dreams into us. He places his visions into us. And then we are God's creative agency to create the future that God has in mind. Back in Genesis chapter 4, it tells us about some men who were pioneers. In verse 20, it says, Ada gave birth to Jabal, and he was the father of those who lived in tents and raised livestock. You see, before Jabal ever lived, no one ever lived in a tent, and no one ever had livestock. They wandered through the prairies, and they hunted, and when it was raining, they got wet. Now, maybe Jabal wasn't the best hunter, so he thought, I think I'm gonna domesticate these things I'll call cattle. And I'll build a fence around them so when everyone else is hunting, I'll have my meal ready for me. And maybe he didn't like the cold or the rain, so he said, I'm gonna take the hide of the cattle, I'm gonna build these tents. Now, even if Jabal wasn't the best looking guy in the world, the moment every other man was walking in the rain and Jabal had a tent, he became the most eligible bachelor in the entire tribe. But he had a brother, and his brother's name was Jubal, and he was the father of all who played stringed instruments and pipes. Before Jubal ever lived, there were no musicians. There was no sphere of music or of business until Jabal and Jubal lived. Now, I don't know what motivated Jubal. Maybe he saw Jabal with all the girls, and he thought, I can up him one. I'm gonna be Joe Houston. I'm gonna create music. And so he puts string instruments together. I don't know exactly what motivated him to get catgut and turn it into strings. Maybe there was a herd that went through, a cat that was just a bit too slow. Everyone else is ignoring the cat, and he goes, look, cat guts. I think I can work with this. And then he makes a harp, and then he makes a flute, and he captures the wind and gives it voice. But before he ever lived, no one had ever done that before. And Zillah also had a son, Tubal-Cain, who forged all kinds of tools out of bronze and iron. Before him, no one ever made a tool. No one ever had a hoe or a shovel. Spheres exist because humans can imagine a world that does not yet exist. God has created you to not simply remember the past or to live in the present, but to create the future. See, for too long, we have seen the church as our fortress from the world. It has been our place of escape. And we see all the spheres as Babylon. And we need to run from Babylon and hide from Babylon. But I love what God says to his people in the days of Jeremiah when they were captured by Babylon. And God spoke words that all of us love and are inspired by. He says, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a future and a hope. And we love to believe that God has a future for us, don't we? It empowers us and gives us courage when we know that God has a hope for us, doesn't it? But sometimes we don't read what the scriptures actually tell us. God says, let me tell you where that future and that hope will come from. Right before that, he says this in verse 4. He says, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage so that they may too also have sons and daughters. Increase in numbers there. Do not decrease. And here it is. Also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have called you, carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. God says we are not the enemy of the world, and they are not our enemies. We are not to run from the spheres. We're not to simply hide from the spheres. We're not to simply survive in the spheres. We are to go into every sphere of human activity, and we're to make sure the city prospers. The church of Jesus Christ is God's gift to the world. We are to go into every sphere and to be the best educators and the best business people and the best political leaders. We are to be the best scientists and the greatest artists. All the creativity and beauty and artistry of the world should emerge out of the church. And it's time to take the Bible back from those who turned it into a manuscript of conformity and reclaim it as our manifesto of creativity. Let us create a better world, a world that no one can imagine, but only through the power of Jesus Christ will that world come to know. You are the creative force of the creator of the universe. Imagine that.